The following is a Hennessy Hendo production. It includes excerpts and material from my vast collection of books and general knowledge. My collection spans many centuries and millennia. I upload as I have time, but the sheer volume is just so immense. It would do the people of the world good to listen to some actual classics or educate themselves on all manner of topics from fictional books to philosophy. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel.
The Insurrection Act is a United States federal law that empowers the President to deploy federal troops or the National Guard within the U.S. in specific situations, such as suppressing civil disorder, insurrection, or rebellion. It serves as an exception to the Posse Comitatus Act, which generally prohibits the use of federal military forces for domestic law enforcement. Key provisions of the Insurrection Act: 1. Authority to use military forces. The President can use federal troops when there is an insurrection against the U.S. government. A state's government requests federal help to suppress violence. There is a situation where the enforcement of federal law is obstructed or impractical. 2. Invoking the Act, the President must issue a proclamation demanding that the insurgents disperse and cease unlawful activities before deploying the military. 3. Circumstances of use. The Act has been used historically in instances of civil unrest, such as the Civil Rights Movement in the 1950s and 1960s. The 1992 Los Angeles riots following the Rodney King verdict. 4. Limitations. While powerful, the Act does not grant unchecked authority. Its use is subject to legal and political scrutiny. Historical context. Passed in 1807, the Insurrection Act was designed to provide the federal government with the ability to enforce laws and maintain order during extreme situations. Over the years, it has been amended and invoked for various purposes, often to address domestic crises. The Insurrection Act has been invoked multiple times throughout U.S. history, usually during times of domestic unrest or significant challenges to public order. Here are some notable examples of its use. 19th century. 1. Aaron Burr Conspiracy, 1807. The Insurrection Act was passed in response to alleged plans by former Vice President Aaron Burr to incite rebellion in the Western Territories. President Thomas Jefferson signed the act in 1807 to thwart Aaron Burr's alleged conspiracy. 2. Civil War, 1861 to 1865. President Abraham Lincoln used the act to combat Confederate secession and enforce federal authority during the Civil War. 20th century. 3. Desegregation of schools, 1957 to 1962. 1957, Little Rock, Arkansas. President Dwight D. Eisenhower invoked the Insurrection Act to send federal troops to enforce school desegregation after the Arkansas governor used the National Guard to block African American students from entering Little Rock Central High School. 1962, Ole Miss integration. President John F. Kennedy used the act to deploy federal forces to quell riots when James Meredith, an African American student, enrolled at the University of Mississippi. 4. Civil Rights Movement, 1960s. Presidents John F. Kennedy and Lyndon B. Johnson invoked the act multiple times to enforce desegregation and protect civil rights activists in the South. 5. Detroit riots, 1967. President Lyndon B. Johnson deployed federal troops to restore order during the Detroit riots, one of the most destructive episodes of civil unrest in U.S. history. 6. 1970 Kent State protests. The act was invoked to address anti-Vietnam War protests, but it was primarily used to activate the National Guard. 7. 1992 Los Angeles riots. President George H.W. Bush invoked the act to quell unrest following the Rodney King verdict. 21st century. 7. Hurricane Katrina, 2005. While there was debate about invoking the Insurrection Act, President George W. Bush did not formally invoke it. However, federal troops assisted in the aftermath, illustrating how the act might be considered in emergencies. 8. 2020 George Floyd protests, not invoked. President Donald Trump threatened to invoke the act during widespread protests following the death of George Floyd but ultimately did not formally do so. You're correct to question why examples like Hurricane Katrina or the George Floyd protests are mentioned if the Insurrection Act was not formally invoked. These examples are significant because they highlight 1. How the act was considered. In both cases, there were public discussions and debates about invoking the Insurrection Act, reflecting its potential role in handling crises. Understanding why it wasn't invoked provides insight into the Act's limitations, political implications, and the gravity of its use. 2. The threshold for invocation. In these situations, federal authorities decided against invoking the Act, choosing alternative measures to address the crises. This underscores how serious a decision it is to deploy federal troops under the Act. Specifics on each case. 1. Hurricane Katrina, 2005. After widespread looting and violence in the aftermath of the hurricane, some called for invoking the Insurrection Act to restore order. However, President George W. Bush worked with Louisiana's governor to use federal resources without formally invoking the act. It demonstrates how, even in extreme situations, the federal government often defers to states unless absolutely necessary. 2. George Floyd protests, 2020. During nationwide protests over police brutality, President Donald Trump suggested invoking the act to deploy military forces in response to escalating unrest. However, state and local governments addressed the situation without federal military intervention. The threat to invoke the act stirred significant public and political controversy, illustrating its divisive nature. Why these examples are relevant? They help illustrate the decision-making process and the high threshold required to invoke the Insurrection Act. These cases also show how its invocation remains a tool of last resort, typically avoided unless absolutely necessary to enforce law and restore order. Summary: the Insurrection Act has been used selectively throughout U.S. history, often in response to major crises like rebellion, civil unrest, or the obstruction of federal law. Its use is generally rare and politically sensitive, reflecting the seriousness of deploying federal troops on U.S. soil.
Thank you for watching. Please share the video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Check out other series including 10-minute synopses or complete audiobooks on Hennessy Hendo on YouTube. Improve your vocabulary. Be more fun at parties. Increase your knowledge. Become a literary master like Hendo.